farmer and a rancher. I'm the third generation on the Camas Prairie. My father's family homesteaded there in 1901, and we've been there ever since. My mother's family came in the early 1880s, and so we have a lot of history there. I was involved in county commissioner. I was on county planning and zoning. I've been soil and water commission member. I've been on the Camas Soil Conservation District for many, many years. And in the 90s, I helped get legislation through for the first organic standards in Idaho. That was my first exposure, if you will, to the legislature. And then later on, in some of our soil and water conservation district work, we again went to the legislature to get some legislation changed. And a couple of the things that were really outstanding to me at that time, there were a couple of guys down there that helped us a lot. And it was my first understanding of kind of how the legislature worked, how those committees worked, and how important it was to have someone there who understood what you were doing and was willing to help you go through that process. And so I thought about it for many years after that, and when the opportunity came to run for an open seat, then I took it and was fortunate enough to win that.
And what's a top priority for you if re-elected this year?
This one, kind of where my heart is education and kids. And, you know, everybody talks about education. There's a lot of things that we have done. We're in a lot better shape in terms of what our schools are achieving in terms of student achievements than most people recognize. We're about average in the nation. We're about 26th in terms of student achievement. But we've got reading scores, math scores that are all in the top 12 states. And in terms of college readiness, I think we're rated fifth in the nation. So we're doing a lot better than a lot of people recognize. But there's also a lot more that we can do. Probably the tender part of my heart is for kids that really don't have an opportunity. And in the past, we've always kind of talked about the poverty level kids, you know, and the generational cycle of poverty. Somehow we need to break that, but that group of kids is a larger group of kids than that. And the way I refer to them now is what I call unparented kids. It doesn't matter if there's an adult in the house or not. If they're not a parent, if they're not somebody that's going to help those kids and work with those kids, then they have a tremendous disadvantage. And so what I've worked towards a lot in these last few years is figuring out how to intervene with those kids at a very young age, because they're very identifiable. Most of them are already in the system, either through pediatric reference or health and welfare or something like that. But this shouldn't be just a governmental intervention. This needs to have the community involved. It needs to have health and welfare and education need to be part of this as those kids come through. But there's also got to be a sense of family, a sense of community that helps these families and these kids and where they're at. And so there are examples out there that I've been pulling different things from, and I think I found a few more people that are willing to work with me in the legislature on this. Those are the kids that have problems in school, obviously. The data shows us that if a child doesn't know how to read by the time they come out of the third grade, a lot of states use that to forecast their prison population for that age group. Now that's a stunning piece of information, and anybody that understands that has to know that that's why we're looking at K-3 literacy. Those kids need to learn how to read so that they can read to learn throughout the whole rest of their lives. These kinds of kids, the unparented kids, a lot of them will have different kinds of abuse, sometimes just neglect, sometimes verbal abuse, sometimes worse. But in this process, they need to receive a certain amount of counseling and therapy just to grow out of that. And it sounds silly that you'd be talking about that with a 3 or 4 year old, but the things that happen to little kids like that stick with them all the rest of their lives. And if they don't have an opportunity somewhere in their life to be treated for that, to get some help from that, to find out that there are normal people out there who will give them respect, friendship, consistently, so that they understand the balance, then it's hard for them to ever escape that. So I know that's a lot of stuff to the question you ask, but the more of those kids we can look at on a preventative basis, then we're not looking at them in the juvenile system. We're not looking at teen pregnancies, drug use, later coming back into corrections. You know, we spend $30,000-$50,000 a year on somebody in corrections. That much money would do a whole lot in terms of prevention and early treatment, early intervention with that kind of group of kids. So that's probably the biggest thing. If I had to pick one thing that I could make a change in or contribute to, that would be it.
And what would be a good program or policy that the legislature could implement that would help affect some of the change that you just described as needed?
It's going to be a combination of things. Like I referred to earlier, this shouldn't just be like a health and welfare issue, you know, where you got a 3-year-old that shows up in the system somewhere and then they get involved. There needs to be some counseling involved. There needs to be some way to involve locally, either groups or churches or the neighborhoods who are willing and understand these kinds of issues and are willing to come in alongside someone, not just tell somebody what to do. This shouldn't be punitive. This should be a thing where you help someone, where you come in and mentor someone. And sometimes it's really hard for people to allow others into their life. So it's very complex. But this shouldn't be a legalistic approach. This should be more of a holistic approach. And not only that child or those children, but that parent or parents, and see if you can help them work through some issues like that. So it's not going to be any one thing. It's going to be a combination of things. One of the things that we can do is look at our counseling in our schools. I think we could do a little bit more that way. I think if we had a little more involvement, and there again, it's a very delicate issue. You know, when you start talking to someone's child in terms of a mental health issue, something like that. But those are some areas we're going to have to begin in.
Definitely. And what are some other issues that maybe aren't on the radar or aren't on like a top list of priorities that you think are important voters in District 26 should know about?
Well, for sure, the Medicaid expansion, you know, from the numbers I've heard people talk about, it's probably going to pass. So then we need to decide how exactly do we do that. Because we shouldn't just do a flat-out Medicaid expansion, because it limits, it's an easy short-term solution, but it's not a fix.